Well, welcome everybody. My name is Laura Colaneri. I'm the Senior Managing Editor of Spanish and Portuguese Review.
And my name is Judit Palencia Gutiérrez, and I am the Managing Editor for Peer Review.
So we're very excited to be talking to everyone today. We're going to give a quick little review of the peer review process, what it's like specifically at Spanish and Portuguese Review, what it's like a little bit in general, even if you don't end up being a reviewer for us. And then we are going to answer and open it up at the end for any questions. So if you have questions, just make a note of it and then let us know at the end. We can go over anything you're not clear on. Okay, Judit, would you like to take it away? I'm going to open up real quick, share my screen, and put up our PowerPoint. Okay, take it away.
There we go. Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to start with a very brief introduction to SPR, who we are, what do we do, just so folks can get familiar with us. So as you may know, we are the journal of the grad student part of AATSP, which is the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. That means that part of our staff is faculty, but mainly everything is operated through grad students, and all the publications that we do are by grad students. We don't publish anything other than grad students' papers, and I'm going to go through the types of publications in a second. We have right here Laura, and then, like I said, I'm also part of the team. We have a main editor, sort of like the managing editor of everything. That will be Professor Stacy Johnson. Then we have a senior managing editor, and then within the managing editors, other than the peer review and copy editing, we have communications, book and tool reviews, and then we have faculty board members and the reviewers, the associate editors, which will be folks like you if you decide in the end to be part of this. We publish a number every year, and we've been doing this since 2015, so the journal's kind of new. And the papers that we publish, they mainly focus on literature, linguistics, cultural studies, obviously on Spain, Latin America, and then Luso and Brazilian studies. The papers are usually between 3,000 and 5,000 words. Now I'm entering more into the sort of the technical aspect of the presentation. We accept papers that are, we do traditional research and theory-based articles, which is the more usual kind of format, right? These are papers that graduate students, like I said, write, and then the format and the extension may vary by discipline, but like I said, between 3,000 and 5,000 words, excluding footnotes and works cited. We also publish response articles. So typically these are short form and they respond directly to an article that has already been printed. So the author of these kind of submissions will be evaluating a previously worked conclusion or theory, whatever that may be. We also publish interviews. So interview that maybe is an interview of an author or maybe an interview of an artist, and then they ship that into an article. We will publish that. We also publish, and I think this is kind of cool, notes from the classroom. So maybe you're interested more in the teaching aspect of your career. Well, you can take notes and then put that together, and we could publish that. And the last type of submission that we do will be book or tool reviews. So just usual review, evaluating either a book or a tool. Maybe, I don't know, if you do digital humanities and you want to evaluate a specific program, specific software, we will publish that as well. This is a very brief introduction of who we are. And again, obviously, if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then at the end, we will get to that. But Laura, do you want to take it from here?
Thanks. So I'm going to go just a little overview of the very, very basics of what peer review is, right? At this point, we're not sure where everybody is in the audience in their career. Maybe you've done a review before. Maybe you even submitted an article and had it go through a review. But the peer review process that we do here at SPR is double anonymous. This means that you may have heard this called a double blind process. Double anonymous is trying to, undo that ableist language. The article you receive won't have any identifying information from the author. The author will also receive your comments without any identifying information from you. Reviewers are supposed to read the article. Obviously, step one, provide substantive comments on information such as things like structure of the article, the theoretical framework, methods, how effective is the argument, what is the quality of the evidence? Is the evidence good? Are your close readings positive? Or is your data high quality? Your scholarly contribution within the field, with an eye towards evaluating and improving the article, right? That's sort of the major goal here, right? You're both trying to improve and evaluate quality here. We assign to each article 2 graduate student reviewers and 1 faculty reviewer to ensure a range of feedback. We know that a lot of our graduate students might be reviewing for the first time, but we are, starting to be experts in our field. So you do have the ability here to review and to rely on that expertise, but also with the extra cushion of, a faculty is going to review it as well. The other reason we have 3 is if one person says one thing and the second person totally disagrees, we've got a little tiebreaker there. So the purpose of peer review at SPR, obviously we want to ensure that the quality of the articles that we publish, right? But also part of our mission at SPR is to help graduate students become more familiar with the publishing process, right? So you as a reviewer are going to become more familiar with peer review processes, and then the author themselves is going to become more familiar with peer review processes. Your article goes review, you start to learn a little bit the expectations for publications, and also you have the ability to improve your article, right? So even if we don't choose to publish an article, we say, this needs too much work, we only have, you probably won't be able to get it done this summer, and so it's really not going to fit into our timeline. You still receive that reviewer feedback with the goal of being able to improve, not just this article, but your writing process overall, right? So if you're getting review comments that say, particular things, you can start keeping those in mind for as you're writing future articles, right? We'll also, sometimes be able to publish an article that doesn't make it through review. People have improved it from one year to the other, and we've published it in the following year in a later issue. Or you can also take that, anytime a reviewer gives you feedback, if a journal chooses not to publish, you can take that feedback and use it to retool the article and resubmit to a different journal, right? So really we're thinking about the benefit of graduate student authors here. So being a peer reviewer, I like to think of it as a generous act for the scholarly community. Peer reviewers pretty much are paid nowhere. Sometimes they get honorariums if they're reviewing like a whole book, for example, at a university press. But essentially, you're donating your time and expertise here to improve the quality of an author's scholarship. So I think a good attitude to have is you're not here to gatekeep as a gatekeeper what does and doesn't get published, but rather you're here to help someone put forward their best possible work and to make sure that we are putting quality information out there, right? So this is really a process to help everyone involved, as a community. Now at Spanish and Portuguese Review, our publishing process in terms of peer review starts with being contacted via email in June. Judit will give a paper title usually and the deadline. She'll talk a little bit more about that. You should respond as soon as possible because then we can make sure, that review goes quickly, so you receive the article as quickly as possible. The title, the paper should be close to your area of expertise, but you want to be able to assess, yes, I feel comfortable doing this review and I can meet the deadline, or no, maybe, I work on gender in the 20th century, but the 19th century I feel like will be a little bit too far out of my wheelhouse, so I don't want to do this review, right? And if you say no, we can always get it to somebody else. Just because you're on our peer review list doesn't mean we will necessarily have an article for you, unfortunately. We do want to be able to make use of as many people as possible, so we often keep people on that list, especially if we need an additional reviewer because somebody drops out or because the reviewers just can't agree. We need an extra pair of eyes. But we might not contact you, and that might just be because we just don't have anything for you this year, which is great because it means we have too many people who want to volunteer their time. Then you'll read that paper closely, you'll take notes, you'll evaluate the strengths, areas for improvement. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then we submit everything through Submittable, which is our online platform. That's where we collect all of our papers at our submission deadlines. And that's where we conduct our reviews and also do our copy editing, actually. So there are particular reviewer questions. I'll let Judit talk a little bit more about that. But you answer those questions. You can make comments directly on the Word document itself and upload that document with comments or with track changes. You just have to make it anonymized, which you can do in the file settings. And then you assign a recommendation to the article, whether you want it to be accepted with revisions, or rejected. Judit?
Yes, I'm just very briefly gonna sort of like introduce to you Submittable, and this is screenshots that I've taken, right? So it's not exactly gonna look like this on your end, but I just want to show you. I cross the name of the articles for anonymity purposes, but the way it works is that authors will submit a article, whatever the format is, through Submittable, and then I go log in, and then you can see that I already have 17 in there. And what Submittable does is it allows me to download the article on my end, because like we said, this is just publication for grad students. So a lot of folks, this is the first time that they send something for publication, right? They don't really know how to clean the document. And by cleaning, I mean getting rid of any information, any sort of identification, whether institutional, your name. So I have to make sure that every document is anonymous. I download the document and I clean that. Like I said, I get rid of all the identification information, and then I upload a new version. Laura, could you go to the other picture? Perfect. So this is a part of the portal that we share, me, the administrators, and also the authors and the reviewers. So here we can see the information about the title of the article, of course, and then those questions that Laura was mentioning. Grad students can only publish in this article, in this journal. So what they have to say is to make a statement saying that at the time of the submission, they are grad students. Then they have to talk about, they have to mention what the institution is, blah, blah, blah. And then they also put, not keywords, but they identify the paper with a couple of fields, whether that's linguistics, literature, and 17th century Spanish drama, for instance, right? So that gives me then information to go to the list of reviewers, see their field of specialization, and assign them papers. Because obviously we want the paper to be evaluated by someone that works in that field, or a field that is related to that. In this picture on your right, you can see activity, reviews. So that is the area where I will be communicating with the author, the administrators, the reviewers. We can write notes in there, we can send messages to each other, and that way we keep the communication going. Maybe there's something, maybe someone uploads the document in PDF, and that for me is kind of difficult to make changes, get rid of the information, etc. So then maybe I send them a message through this portal, and I say, hey, could you submit this in Word format? Yeah, that's pretty much the submittable part of it. All right.
Yeah, so it's sort of I found it to be like not immediately an intuitive platform, but it looks a little bit less complicated. on the reviewers end, I think. So don't worry about that too much, but that is yeah, how we conduct all of these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about expectations, best practices for review, a little bit in general, but also here at SPR specifically, right? So different journals are going to have maybe different standards, different expectations, different things we want. Excuse me. But in general, I think that this is sort of a good thing to have in mind for any sort of review, but definitely for us in particular, right? So what kind of feedback we're looking for. When you go into submittable and you look at that right-hand column, there will be under the review tab a list of questions that we ask our reviewers to answer. I don't know if we'll be changing these at all this year, but this is at least what we had last year, and I think it's pretty similar to the questions we've had for the past couple of years, right? So the first question that we ask the reviewers to answer is, what are the main parts of these, main points of this article? This helps provide a summary of the article's argument, basically, right? What's the point of this question? Which helps actually articulate its complexity, right? So if you are, as a reviewer, sort of articulating the main points, and you find that it's like, here's like one very simple main point, maybe that's indicating that the argument isn't complex enough, right? But more than that, more than identifying sort of how complex or not complex is this argument, it can actually help the author a lot in the rewriting process, because often it's a lot easier for a second person to more succinctly and actually effectively state the argument. So if a reviewer, for example, answers this question, doesn't seem to get the major points of the article, or if the reviewer is sort of saying, okay, I see this point, but these other points are unclear, that actually means that the author, well, either the reviewer didn't read it very closely, which we hope isn't the case, or actually the author hasn't effectively conveyed their ideas. And so even if a reviewer totally perfectly understands the main points, really, an outside person can more effectively summarize our ideas than we can ourselves sometimes, right? And so this clarity can really help when revising the article. The other sort of helpful part about this is, especially because we are a journal that is publishing in English, Spanish, Portuguese, we're dealing with people from a variety of different academic and scholarly traditions. We also have to acknowledge that sort of what we think makes an effective article in the United States is not necessarily the same style or approach in, many other countries, right? So at least in the US context, a clear, complex, original, and well-defended argument is the most important part of an article, right? So that's why this first question is trying to get at what's the argument, right? What new insights does this article make to the field? That's one of our next questions. This question helps indicate basically what's the scholarly contribution that an article is making. An article should contribute something new. Doesn't have to be, when we use the word original, we have to take that with a grain of salt, right? Because we're, building on other scholarship. You're not necessarily like totally deviating, and, we're not necessarily, our first article or second article we publish in grad school is probably not going to be like a field defining article, right? So that's not what our expectation here is. We don't need it to be earth shattering, just something kind of new, some sort of a new innovation, right? It should expand on previous scholarship, and it should manage well and articulate how it fits in with the wider literature and ongoing discussions, right? So when we say what new insights does it make, we're not saying it totally created a new field. We're saying how does it have a conversation with its literature review, its other scholarly sources, right? What are the strongest aspects of this article? This can be a lot of things, right? Is it the argument? Is it the evidence? Is it its analyses or close readings, theoretical framework, data, strong writing, effective structure, originality? You want to be oriented towards like what's the strength? What is making this article work, right? Because that's important too, right? To recognize, maybe what doesn't need a lot of work and what is making this sort of a potentially worthwhile to publish because it's got, really new, interesting data or whatever, right? Do you know of any additional sources that would help improve the article? Please list them here. This is a question for reviewers that can help the author expand literature review. It can also help indicate to an author if there's maybe like a major work in the field that they should be in dialogue with, but they're not yet, right? It can help strengthen an author's evidence. This can also help improve the complexity of the article, especially if you're saying there's evidence that contrasts with their argument. You should be able to, as an author, contend with or address that, because that can actually strengthen the sort of nuances of your argument to say, oh, author X says Y, but I'm saying Z because of A, right? And also here, I think we should also think about the importance of citational values, right? Who are we citing and who are we leaving out? That's still an important question. So you want to make sure an author is, citing recent or relatively recent work. Again, the standards vary based on field for what recent means. They shouldn't be exclusively citing white men. That's another important thing, right? If you look at a bibliography and you're finding that it is, a bibliography that's biased, that seems to be leaving a large group out, you should notice that, right? That this is, why. You should at least be asking, why is that? And are there additional sources that, rather, that's not just a way to critique an author, but to encourage them to be reading these other sources that they should be incorporating. Next question, we have what revisions, if any, would be necessary before this article is published. Here is the opportunity for a reviewer to summarize and refer to specific examples and parts of the article, right? So some common examples of revisions that an article might need. Might need to restructure or reorganize the content to more effectively convey the argument or be more clear to the reader. This can include something like incorporating signposting to help signal the structure to the reader, right? So signposting is any sort of sentence or sort of comment that says, as we will see later, this thing happens, that sort of thing. Stuff that signals to the author sort of more explicitly what direction, what arc the article is taking, right? Another common example of a suggested revision would be articulating the argument more clearly, refining its complexity, articulating the contribution to the field more clearly, right? We want to be very clear about where we're intervening in our articles. Improving the secondary bibliography that the article engages with, incorporating more or better evidence. You might say, ooh, your argument seems kind of convincing, but you're taking this passage from the novel, and I'm familiar with the novel, and maybe a couple more close readings would really help drive the point home, for example, right? Or improving the analysis of the evidence. You might review an article and say, the evidence is there, but you're not exactly telling me what that means, right? So maybe you presented me with a quote, but then, you just leave the quote sort of floating there and you haven't explained why this quote, what does this quote mean for your argument? Finally, we have what is your overall recommendation for this article? So there's 3 stages: accept with revisions, and reject. Some other other journals might be, have more sort of in between stages. They might say accept with major or minor revisions. Or they might say revise and resubmit. We don't have a revise and resubmit option because we just don't, we don't have the time for you to revise and resubmit over one summer. But a reject can mean a revise and resubmit, and we'll communicate with the authors to that effect, right? We'll say, hey, this one reviewer said reject, another reviewer said accept with revisions, but we decided to go with reject because we just think those revisions are too big for you to do, and by the time we're trying to publish this volume in the fall. But you can feel free to make those revisions and resubmit the article to us next year, right? So don't worry a little bit, too much about the nuances of that, but I will review sort of what that means really briefly. When you say accept, you're sort of saying the text is very nearly perfect as is, right? There might be some very, very, very minor revisions you would recommend. None of it is so significant as to prevent the article from being published in like close to its current form, right? So that means you highly, highly recommend the article to be published. Accept with revisions is the most classic, answer for every article, right? Even, the article that, famous rock star academics write. A lot of those are still going to be accepted with revisions. This means that the text is good, very good, but you wouldn't want to see it published right now as is in its current form without any revisions taking place, right? But the revisions that you recommend, they'll improve the article, right? But they should only really take the author 4 to 6 weeks, a month or 2 to be able to complete, right? So, when you accept something with revisions, it means like, oh, maybe you need to go through and restructure the article and articulate your argument better. but it's not something like so major. But if you're saying somebody has to go out there and, collect completely new data because their data just isn't supporting what they're saying or whatever, that's not going to happen in 4 to 6 weeks probably, right? So you want to think very, very closely about, do you really want this accepted with revisions or do you want it rejected, right? And reject, it doesn't mean, and we have to make this clear to authors too, and we will, that doesn't mean, your article is useless, right? So reject can mean that the article is worthwhile, but it just requires so many revisions to reach sort of the publishable quality we would want that it would take the author too long to revise it for it to fit into our publishing cycle this year. Our publishing cycle, we publish 1 volume per year. We accept things in the spring. Our deadline just passed. I believe it was this past Friday. So our deadline is usually at the end of May. We do peer review through June and July. We move on to copy editing in August and September. And then we're going into production to try to get those final PDFs posted on our website by, December, right? Does it always happen that way? No, sometimes we get a little bit delayed, right? Especially in certain steps. But that's really our goal. And so it's sort of like, if you get an article back in July and you're just like at the end of July maybe, and you're like, oh my God, there's no way I can, get this, revised to copy editing within 4 to 6 weeks, it's just not going to happen, right? And that's okay. That's okay. We can accept that, sometimes that means the article requires really significant restructuring, really significant rewriting just to be effective. It can also mean that the article has no argument, right? So if it's just information and no argument, that's not usually the sort of article that is going to be, something we're going to be looking at to publish. It can also mean it doesn't really have an original contribution. Maybe it is writing something with an argument, but it's sort of just restating the argument in the secondary literature, and it's like a literature review and nothing else, right? It can mean that the article has really major problems like complete inaccuracies that they're not easily fixed. It's not just you accidentally wrote 1982 when you meant to write 1892, which is a typo. It's that you really are relying upon information that's incorrect, right? And finally, it can also just mean that the article doesn't fit within the journal scope. So usually if it's outside of our scope, if it's like not the sort of thing we publish because it's just, maybe it's not in the field, somebody accidentally submitted a French article, that shouldn't make it to peer review, right? Usually we'll just reject that because we know it doesn't fit in our scope. But maybe you read it and you're just like, it just doesn't feel like it's we publish a lot, right? So we're really interdisciplinary. Probably if it makes it to you, it will be within our scope, but maybe you'll feel like it just isn't, or maybe as a peer reviewer, you'll discover you've already read this article and they published it somewhere else and they submitted to us and, forgot, or they didn't revise it very significantly from the other thing that they published. The next thing I want to talk about really briefly is what kind of feedback are we not looking for, right? So what is not the point of peer review, right? Which is not always what we think about, right? One thing, I always say grammar. Some people might disagree with me on this, but I think that issues of grammar are secondary because all articles are going to go through copy editing, right? So as a peer reviewer, if you're reading and you're like, your argument is clear, but your sentence structure could use some work, that's sort of relevant, but the sentence structure sort of thing. But like if you're like, oh, your grammar has some errors, maybe because somebody is writing in their second language or even their third language, that doesn't matter so much. If you can understand what the article is trying to say, we are going to fix any grammar issues during the copy editing process. So don't get hung up on that. I've seen reviewers get hung up on that and be like, bad grammar means it's a bad article. That's not true. Sometimes it means someone's writing in their second or third language, and we want to make sure that they put out the best work that they can, so we will fix that, but we don't want that to be a gatekeeping sort of move. Personal disagreements, that means like if you have a counter argument, basically, peer reviewers aren't the devil's advocate. You might have a really good counter argument, but if it's sort of like something that they've addressed, right? So if they sort of say, here's a possible counter argument, but it's not in the scope of my article, the peer reviewer isn't the devil's advocate. You're not writing a response article. If you think the argument has enough evidence to back it up, it's still okay for you to disagree with it for this or that reason, right? It's okay for you to disagree with it. Maybe you have a political disagreement with it, right? Maybe you have, I don't know, an emotional disagreement with it. You're like, I just hate this book, you know? That's fine. You can still, you know, that's not really relevant for peer review, right? And then the other thing is, you know, feedback that's irrelevant or feedback that would totally change the article, right? Articles are short. They're not going to be able to address, especially ours. It's only, you know, you only have 5,000 words. You can't address every single point and counterpoint in order to make this argument. There might be some things that are left out, right? This isn't to say that like you can never have feedback that would sort of change the nature of the article. Like, for example, sometimes people leave out info that's actually really important, right? You can't have an article generalizing about Colombian women that's really only talking about white women, right? For example, we don't want to do that, right? So if something relevant and you're like, this is really important for you to include, definitely include it. But, you know, something that's outside the scope of the article would be an article about Colombia that doesn't consider Argentina, right? An article talking about affect theory, it doesn't have to incorporate eco-criticism. An article using quantitative methods doesn't also have to use qualitative methods, right? So sometimes, you know, it's just something that it's totally outside of the scope of the article. It would really change what it is. It might not be really relevant. I mean, you might want to mention it if it feels like something that it could benefit the article, but you have to accept what an article is and what an article isn't trying to do, right? So finally, this is my last section, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. These are just some best practices that are sort of my personal approach to peer review and things that I think are really helpful. Judit, you please mention and anything else that I might have left off here, because, you know, I'm sure there's some ideas that I haven't thought of, but, you know, we really like you to be constructive, positive, not destructive or negative, right? We're trying to improve the article, right? We want this to be palatable to authors. You know, we're not here for our own ego. We're here for improving our scholarly community and helping one another out, right? We're here in the collaborative pro-grad student space, right? We're not trying to knock each other down. So try to frame any negative feedback constructively, right? You're not going to have, you know, nothing negative to say, but you can say it in a nicer way, right? So say, is there a positive way that I can frame this negative feedback? You want to treat the author as a colleague. Remember, you're lending your expertise to help somebody improve their scholarship, so your feedback should be for their benefit. And also address the article, not the person. So rather than saying the author's argument is not effective enough, you can just say the article's argument needs to be better articulated, right? So address the article and what's on the page, the text, not the individual that you may think is behind it, right? Be attentive to what the article is actually saying, not what you think it is saying, you imagine it could be saying, right? So sometimes I think that, you know, if you're not reading the article closely, you know, maybe we'll have, you know, the infamous reviewer too, who says like, oh, the author tries to argue this, but they're really ineffective. And the author is like, but that's not what I'm trying to argue at all, right? So maybe the author is being, you know, unclear in their argument, and that can be useful. But also maybe the reviewer is, you know, reading an article and sort of like thinks it's saying one thing because they're not paying very close attention, right? Take notes while you read. That'll help you complete the review. I think that's probably second nature for graduate students, but doesn't hurt to remind people that you should be keeping those questions in mind while you're reading, while you're taking notes. And then also remember that, you know, there's no perfect article out there. If you find minor flaws, I think a lot of times minor flaws like grammatical issues predispose people to think negatively of the whole work. But remember, there's always going to be room for improvement. So finding an error in one aspect of an article doesn't mean there's going to be errors, you know, all over the place or that it's totally unredeemable, right? You might find some sort of an error that you're like, oh man, how could they not realize, you know, even if it's something that you're like, how could anybody make this error? Just try and remember, you know, it's, you know, everybody's going to do something like that every once in a while, right? And it's really not sometimes a big deal, but you're just trying to make it better, right? So try to remember that, like, you know, there's always room for improvement, but that also doesn't mean that when you see areas needing improvement that it's, you know, horrible or anything close to that, right? Did you have anything to add to this?
Just very quickly, what I like to do when I'm reviewing a article is to think, to kind of like project myself and think that I am the author. How would I like the feedback? How would I like to receive that, right? This is grad students submitting maybe their first paper. So if you mention maybe what Laura was saying, that the grammar is not that good. Oh, this is horrible. I'm not good at this. You know, we tend to take criticism very badly at the first stages of our career. So just I like to be as nice as I can in the feedback. That doesn't mean that I'm not gonna tell them, hey, you should improve this. But the framing, what Laura was saying, is very, very important. And the other thing that I would like to mention is also, I don't know if you folks have already reviewed in the past. Maybe not. Maybe this is the first time you're reviewing a paper. So give yourself some time to give yourself some, some credit. Reviewing, getting familiar with the review process is sometimes kind of frustrating. May take you too long. You may, be working on this for the whole day, maybe. Keep in mind that this is a process, right? When we assign papers to faculty, they usually, they review them within a morning. They review a couple papers, maybe more than that. So if you take too long doing this, just keep in mind that this is a learning process. Don't hate the process. Just try to learn from that, right? So yeah, just take it as a very good opportunity to get yourself familiar with the process from the other side, right? So that's gonna help you to then submit your application, your articles to other journals. You're gonna keep in mind, what are they looking for? Because I've already done that. I've already been on the other side, right? So I think that with this, Laura, we open the floor for questions. Whatever you folks have, to ask about, just feel free. You can drop it in the chat. You can just go ahead and unmute yourselves, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have. Or if you have any comments, anything that you would like to add to the presentation, feel free. Mariana.
Hi, thank you. Quick question. So how do I get to be a reviewer? Like what kind of contacts or what do I have to do in order to be hired or in order to participate with a journal as a reviewer?
I am going to drop in the chat my email, and I think I should be the person that you reach out to. Just say, hey, Judith, my name is Mariana. You don't have to say that you were at the workshop. You say, I am interested in being part of SPR. And then I'll send you a link where you can submit your actual information.
Oh, so, okay. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. But also, like, if I wanted to be contacted by some other journal, like, I mean, not only this one, and I would be interested in participating in this one too. But if I wanted to participate with another one, like, is it just a matter of like networking, making contact with people, with editors?
You can go to the website and like say if you're interested in X journal, maybe you go to the website, you find a contact, and you say, hey, can I become? Because I've done that in the past, and that's usually how they work. They're always looking for more people. So it's not gonna be you imposing yourself. If anything, it's just gonna be helpful for you to reach out. Sometimes they do events like this one, like recruiting events and stuff like that. But usually in the past, if it's not through networking, what I've done is just email the journal. Hey, do you need people? I would like to help.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I also just add actually, so yes, you should send an email because it's always nice to get to know people, but we do have a volunteer form now that's out on our website. I just dropped the link in the chat, and I'll ask everybody, who's on the call to go ahead and fill that out, because then we will have your information already and we can contact you as we're going through and assigning peer reviewers. And yeah, sometimes, other journals, it really depends. Some journals have policies about whether they want graduate student reviewers or not. So I do recommend you to check out those websites and sort of see, and you can always send an email and say, hey, I'm not sure, but you can, let me know if you're looking for anybody, this is what I'm an expert in. I'm seeing Kobe in the chat, who's asking to clarify, peer reviewers only review traditional articles or other types of publications as well. Right, I actually meant to mention that I was sort of orienting my comments towards the traditional articles, but we do have everything go through peer review. That's correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so you'll want to tailor, I think, your comments obviously towards the different types of articles that there are. You're not going to have the exact same comments for something that's supposed to be a response article, right? Maybe it doesn't have to be as long. It doesn't have to have as long of a bibliography, etc. Right? So there will be sort of different genres that you'll want to tailor your responses to. So I'm seeing a response also to our form that we put in the chat. It says, I was wondering about the difference between associate editor of copy editing, associate editor of production, and associate editor of communications. So as Judit was mentioning, we have our sort of managing editors that overview each stage of the process. Associate editors work with those managing editors to do certain tasks of those particular in those particular areas. And so if you're interested in copy editing, that means you are going to be assigned an article that you sort of become the expert on, right? That you're going to, it's already been through peer review. You're going to read through it very closely. You're going to be fixing those issues of grammar, sentence structure, maybe even sort of reorganizing the content a little bit, doing the really like nitty gritty close. That's what copy editing is the sort of like, line editing, meaning like at the micro sort of structure of the sentence, but also maybe some macro editing, right? So you're going to be giving those comments and track changes to the author so that they can make those sort of final revisions. Now, production is when we actually put the articles into pages. So an associate editor of production will work with our managing editor of production to sort of pre-check. We have a pre-production checklist where we go through and make sure everything's ready to put into pages in Adobe InDesign. Then usually our managing editor will handle the putting into pages. But if you are not familiar and you want a little bit of training on InDesign and learn how to sort of lay out an article, then you can also work in that stage if you want to be able to learn about that a little bit, or if you have experience in it. And then finally, they'll usually do the proofreading, which is to say they'll review the sort of final laid out article against the original manuscript and make sure any final errors have been corrected, check for typos, that sort of thing. Associate editor of communications, we have a communications team now we have a managing editor of communications who works with an associate editor right now and does things like put together copy for AACSB newsletters, posts on Twitter and Facebook, keeps in touch with people about sort of the outward facing aspects of the journal, helps with our website, that sort of thing. Judit, do you want to take this one? I'll just read it.
Because my husband is in the house. Sorry, folks. Yeah, so I am actually gonna copy and paste in the chat the description that we have in the website. I don't know if folks are familiar with the website. I'm also gonna copy the information, the link in here. But that is the information that we have in the website. And then at the bottom of what you just pasted, what it says, for example, see Quiñones and Maldonado, etc., that you can see in our website, so you can have a better idea. But mainly what we're looking for in this kind of submission is, like I mentioned, if you're interested more in the sort of like the teaching aspect of the profession, then maybe you take copies of, you take notes in classroom, and then you put them together, and then you make a little reflection if you want on how to teach this, or that sort of reflection. So it's not specifically just notes of the classroom, but also a sort of like meta reflection on how that can, be oriented towards teaching. And I am gonna copy the link of the website so you can, you have more information on there.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a reflecting, a reflection article, right? It can still engage particularly with, theory and things like that, but it's really talking about practice in the classroom and what what it looks like, certain aspects, right? I'm not actually finding the article. Oh, there it is. So yeah, our notes from the classroom article is actually from our fall 2019 volume 5 issue. So you can also see that on the website. You can, I'll put that link in the chat. You can scroll on down for that example. It's in Portuguese. It's talking about, teaching Portuguese. And it's talking about the use of articles basically before possessives for people who are Spanish speakers learning Portuguese. So that's really what it is. It's the author is reflecting on this teaching practice. It is obviously linguistically informed because it's talking about a particular item, but it's talking about specifically pedagogical practice, right? And so I think that's really, really the difference, right? We're talking about practical aspects of teaching as opposed to, sort of theoretical pedagogy in some of those. Okay, well, we're at 11:50 a.m., so we have about 10 more minutes if anyone has any other questions. But if not, we can also close out.
Thank you everyone for attending, and like I dropped in the chat my email, if you need anything, just reach out to me or to Laura. You can go to the website and find our information. But thank you so much for attending the workshop today.